For more than 2 decades, humanity had a home above Earth. A place where astronauts floated 400 kilometers above the planet, where sunrise happened every 90 minutes, where science, politics, survival, and ambition all met in one fragile machine. The International Space Station was never just a laboratory. It was a symbol that even rival nations could build something together beyond the borders of Earth. But by 2026, something had changed. The space station was no longer just about astronauts doing experiments in orbit. It had become the center of a much bigger story, a story about private companies, new space powers, commercial stations, aging technology, and the future of human life beyond Earth. Because in 2026, the question was no longer, can humans live in space? The real question became, who will control the next home above Earth? The story begins long before 2026. For generations, scientists imagined a permanent human outpost in space. Not just a spacecraft, not just a temporary mission, but a real station, a place where people could live, work, sleep, repair equipment, conduct research, and watch Earth from above. That dream became reality with the International Space Station. Built piece by piece in orbit, the ISS became one of the most complex engineering projects in human history. The United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada all contributed to it. Different countries, different technologies, different political interests, but one shared goal: to keep humans permanently living in space. Since the year 2000, there has almost always been a human presence aboard the ISS. Think about that. While presidents changed, wars happened, economies collapsed, pandemics spread, and technology transformed life on Earth, someone was still living above us. Someone was looking down at our planet from orbit. For more than 20 years, the ISS proved that space was not just a destination. It could be a workplace. But by 2026, the station was no longer young. And that changed everything. The International Space Station is enormous. It is roughly the size of a football field, with solar arrays stretching out like golden wings. But despite its beauty, the ISS is also old. Some parts of the station have been in space for decades. Every day, it faces extreme conditions. Micrometeoroids, radiation, temperature swings, orbital debris, mechanical stress, aging seals, aging modules, aging systems. Space is not gentle. Even a tiny problem in orbit can become dangerous. There is no repair shop nearby, no emergency landing strip, no second chance if a critical system fails. By 2026, engineers were not just asking how to use the station. They were asking how long it could safely continue. This is where the story becomes bigger than science. Because the ISS was never meant to last forever. NASA and its partners had already been planning for its eventual retirement. The station that once represented the future was now approaching the final chapter of its life. And when one era ends in space, another one begins. For decades, space stations were government projects. Only nations could afford them. Only national space agencies could build them. Only highly trained astronauts could live there. But by 2026, that old model was breaking. Private companies were becoming major players in orbit. SpaceX had already changed human spaceflight by regularly sending crews to the ISS. Private astronaut missions became more visible. Commercial research became more serious. Space was no longer only about flags and national pride. It was about business. Pharmaceutical companies wanted to study medicine in microgravity. Materials science researchers wanted to create things impossible to make on Earth. Technology companies wanted to test robotics, artificial intelligence, and advanced communication systems. Even tourism entered the conversation. The space station slowly became more than a government laboratory. It became the prototype for an orbital economy. And that was one of the biggest changes of all. Because once companies saw low Earth orbit as a market, the future of space stations changed forever. The next station might not belong to one country. It might belong to a corporation, or several corporations, or a partnership between governments and private industry. By 2026, low Earth orbit was no longer just a scientific frontier. It was becoming real estate. For many years, when people said, the space station, they usually meant the ISS. But by 2026, that was no longer the whole story. China had built and operated its own space station, Tiangong. This was a major turning point. For the first time in the modern era, humanity had more than one major orbital outpost. The space station era had become multipolar. This mattered deeply, because space stations are not only scientific platforms. They are political symbols. They show technological power. They show national confidence. They show who can build, launch, maintain, and operate complex systems beyond Earth. The ISS represented cooperation between major space powers. Tiangong represented a new phase, one where China had its own independent human spaceflight infrastructure. And that changed the balance of space. By 2026, the world was not looking at one shared orbital home. It was looking at multiple futures. One future led by government partnerships. One future led by private companies. One future led by rising space powers. And one future that no one fully controlled yet. The question was no longer whether humans could build stations in orbit. The question was who would build the next ones, and why. As the ISS moved closer to retirement, a new generation of commercial space stations began taking shape. Companies proposed orbital platforms that could replace the ISS or work alongside it. Some designs imagined modular stations. Others imagined inflatable habitats. Some focused on research. Some focused on manufacturing. Some focused on tourism. Some focused on becoming private laboratories in orbit. This was the real shift. The old space station was built mainly for exploration and science. The next space stations would be built for customers. Governments could rent space. Scientists could rent space. Companies could rent space. Private astronauts could visit. Manufacturing could happen in orbit. Media productions, experiments, training missions, and commercial services could all become part of the business model. It sounded futuristic. But by 2026, it was no longer science fiction. It was becoming a plan. The space station was transforming from a symbol of international cooperation into a platform for the space economy. And that created both excitement and fear. Because once orbit becomes commercial, access may increase. But control may become complicated. Who sets the rules? Who protects safety? Who owns the research? Who benefits from discoveries made above Earth? These questions became more urgent than ever. So why does any of this matter? Why do humans need a space station at all? The answer is microgravity. In orbit, objects appear weightless. Fluids behave differently. Fire burns differently. Human muscles and bones weaken without gravity. Cells grow in unusual ways. Materials form with fewer defects. This environment allows scientists to study things that cannot be fully recreated on Earth. The ISS has helped researchers understand human health, radiation exposure, fluid physics, plant growth, protein crystals, and long-duration survival in space. This matters because future missions to the Moon and Mars will require humans to survive far from Earth for long periods of time. A space station is not just a laboratory. It is a training ground. Every day in orbit teaches us something about life beyond Earth. How do humans sleep in space? How do they exercise? How do they deal with isolation? How do machines survive for years without easy replacement? How do crews repair life support systems while floating in zero gravity? These lessons are priceless. And by 2026, the need for those lessons was growing. Because humanity was no longer thinking only about orbit. It was thinking about the Moon, Mars, deep space, and eventually, permanent settlement beyond Earth. But behind the technology, there is something more emotional. The space station changed how humans see Earth. Astronauts often describe something called the overview effect. From orbit, borders disappear, countries shrink, conflicts look small, the atmosphere looks thin and fragile. Earth does not look divided, it looks alive. The ISS gave humanity one of its most powerful mirrors. It showed us that our planet is beautiful, but vulnerable. It also showed us that humans can survive in places where we were never meant to live. Inside the station, astronauts live in a machine that must constantly protect them from death. Outside, there is vacuum, radiation, extreme cold, extreme heat, silence. And yet, humans adapted. They worked. They laughed. They celebrated holidays. They took photographs. They looked back at Earth and reminded us that exploration is not only about going somewhere new. It is about understanding where we came from. That emotional power is part of why the next chapter matters so much. Because when the ISS is gone, humanity will not just lose a machine. It will lose an icon. So what really changed everything in 2026? It was not one single launch. It was not one single mission. It was the realization that the space station era had entered a transition point. The first era was survival. Could humans live in space? The second era was cooperation. Could nations build and operate a permanent station together? The third era was science. Could orbit become a laboratory for discoveries impossible on Earth? But by 2026, a fourth era was beginning. The era of orbital infrastructure. Space stations were no longer seen as rare, symbolic megaprojects. They were becoming the foundation for an economy above Earth. A place for research, manufacturing, training, tourism, technology testing, international influence, and preparation for deep space exploration. The space station was no longer the destination. It was becoming the starting point. That is what changed everything. The International Space Station proved that humans could live beyond Earth. But 2026 showed something even bigger. It showed that the future of space would not belong to one station, one nation, or one idea. The future would be built by many players, governments, companies, scientists, engineers, astronauts, and dreamers. The ISS may one day fall back through Earth's atmosphere, burning like a final sunrise over the ocean. But its legacy will not disappear. Because every future space station will carry a piece of what it taught us. That humans can cooperate. That humans can adapt. That humans can build homes in impossible places. And that the next chapter of civilization may not begin on Earth, but above it.